One in Three is intended for mature audiences. Episodes contain explicit content and may be triggering as they often include violence and other varying forms of abuse, such as emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical. In most cases, names have been changed to protect all involved. Please note, statements and opinions of guests do not necessarily reflect those of my own. Hi, Warriors. Welcome to One in Three. I'm your host, Ingrid. We first learned about the Wings program based in Chicago back in January when Anthony Pasquini joined the show. Today, April is here to take us deeper into the work they do with a special focus on their hospital-based program. In this conversation, April provides valuable insight on traumatic brain injuries, a topic that is often misunderstood. As she explains, traumatic brain injuries do not just involve visible head trauma, which leads us to the conversation surrounding strangulation. We also talk about lethality risk assessments and why understanding these warning signs can quite literally save lives. Here's April. Hi, April. Thank you for joining me and welcome to One in Three.
Thank you.
You are affiliated with an organization and we're going to talk all about that organization. But before we get into that, do you mind just sharing some background so everyone gets to know you just a little bit?
Absolutely. My name is April Brayton. I am the Director of Community-Based Services for the Wings program. We're a domestic violence agency, actually the largest domestic violence agency in the state of Illinois. We have two shelters, one in the northwest suburbs and one in Chicago. We have outreach programs such as a hospital program, which I'll talk a little bit more about in depth as we go through. We have a Survivor Lifeline mentoring program, which pairs survivors of intimate partner violence that are kind of on the other side and have done the work to get themselves in a better place, and they want to give back. And they're paired with somebody who is either in the process of leaving or still with the person that causes harm. And those are our Survivor Lifeline mentors. And then we also have our housing program. And that is a vast program, both city and suburbs. And then we have a counseling program in both city and suburbs and a children's program, city and suburbs. So it is a very large organization. And our hospital program is mostly what I'm going to talk a little bit more about today. I've been working for Wings for about 16 years now. Prior to that, I worked in legal advocacy out of the courthouse in the northwest suburbs. And prior to that, finance. My background is I have an MBA. And with the 16 years that I've worked for this nonprofit, I say I'm kind of like an armchair therapist at this point with all the trainings that I've done. But so that is a little bit about my background.
Yeah, that's huge for an organization to take on that. How long has Wings been around?
Wings has been around for 40 years. Our CEO, Rebecca Darr, has been with us for about 27 or 28 years at this point. She is an amazing leader for this organization. She has taken it from a very small organization. I think when it started, it was just like they had a house that they were utilizing as kind of like a shelter. They could have maybe a few families in there, did a little outreach to the point where now we have two 45-bed houses and one of the largest housing programs also for transitional. So in other words, you could come in from any touch point. So maybe you're a survivor that comes through the mentoring program, or you're one of our survivors that comes through one of our hospitals. And as most people know, if once you leave the person that causes harm, that's just the beginning, right? That's just the first step. It takes time. It takes a lot of support. And it takes a community to actually help that family get from one place to the next. So, getting the assistance, living in a safe house, possibly, then going potentially to a transitional housing program, and then 2.5 years later, going back into the community. And that's where one of our mentors would come in, because oftentimes people that have gone through our program, which is about a 2.5 year program, when they go back into the community, sometimes they have a support system reestablished. Oftentimes they don't. And so having that mentor is kind of that extra step for somebody that's getting, re-embedded into their community. Maybe it's just about just processing their day, or, can you help me? I lost my job. Help me with my resume. It starts off oftentimes just on the phone, and then sometimes texting. But then down the road, what ends up happening is, they'll meet in person, they'll develop a relationship, and it's really up to them. This is not counseling. This is more of a big sister, big brother role. We pair them. We pair the mentors specific to their needs.
That is amazing that you encompass that entire timeline, because everyone's heard the statistics of how victims often return to their abusers on average 7 times. And little side note, if you've gone back to your abuser 9 times, that doesn't mean you're a failure. It varies. It's an average. But one of the reasons is because of lack of housing or financial difficulties, or just that difficult time adjusting, like you said, to the community. Because in these relationships, you're beat down to where you are so dependent on this other person. That's what they do. And you're so isolated. Like you mentioned the lack of support system. So that's really incredible that you guys take on that long of a role.
Yeah, it definitely takes a lot. I mean, we obviously refer out for different services or things that they may need that we don't provide. But when they come in to our program, especially our housing or our safe house, they get a counselor. They get a child advocate, which is a master level counselor that will work with mom or dad in parenting, and then work with the child one-on-one. And then we also have, they'll have a caseworker that works with them on anything from what's your next step to finding a job. Everything is worked out with them, and they can have if they're have something involved with the hospital, they could get a medical advocate. Or if there is the potential, we also do assessments for potential brain injuries. And so if one of the advocates or counselors is like, hey, I think there's something here, I'm going to refer them to the hospital program, to a medical advocate. And then we'll do an assessment just by asking some questions. And then they could either come into the program through an internal program of one of ours, or most of the time they come to us through a hospital, one of our partner agencies.
That's just absolutely incredible. I love that, because I never had to use a domestic violence agency for myself, but with doing this podcast, I've talked to so many survivors, so many advocates, and a lot of the programs that are there to help victims are very condensed into, let me just help with this immediate need that you have. And then after this immediate need, you need to move on to someone or something else.
Right. But what we've found, especially with our, it's kind of like a co-location program, which would be, we're bringing the service to the hospital, right? So our advocates, we'll get a call from any touch point in the hospital. Could be the ED, could be, PIOP, it could be, pre-surge, post. They come from everywhere. You'd be surprised. Most people are like, oh, they all come from the ED. No, not all of them come from the ED. And so once we get that call, because the questions were asked in the hospital, and that patient has said, I don't feel safe, or I have been hurt, they're given the option to have a medical advocate come to their bedside and actually talk to them. So with our partner hospitals, that's one of the things that we do with them. We do a lot of medical training for their physicians, their nurses, their social workers, their EMTs, because they're all the people that are doing the first, they have that first contact with that patient. And what we keep telling them is, if you want to stop recidivism, you don't want them to keep coming back, right? But if you're not addressing those underlying issues that they're coming in and they're saying, I can't sleep, or I have headaches constantly, or they're constantly saying, they're coming to the ED and I'm clumsy, I broke my arm, I did this, I did that, whatever. And they're not asking the questions, or they're asking the questions with the person that causes harm in the room, which is another issue, right? Because they're not going to feel safe telling you, oh, I don't feel safe at home. They're not going to say that if the person that's doing it is right next to them. So we do a lot of education on that as well. We talk to them about, just because they say, this is my sister, or this is my mother, my brother, my mother, my father, don't assume that that could not be the person causing harm, because oftentimes it is.
Right. And I'm going to be honest, I think this is the first time I've ever actually heard of an organization having a hospital program within their organization. I know that there are people who want to educate more in those systems, but that's not all you do.
Oh, no. We provide that. We talk to the nurses and the physicians and the, assistant nurses and the LPNs. We talk to them about, because I understand being a nurse. My mom was a nurse. My son started studying to be a nurse. And what I always was told, you are expected to care for so many patients, right? And nurses get into this industry because they're they care, right? And so when they ask those safety questions when the patient comes in, and every hospital has their set of, because it's mandated. When they ask those questions, they're asking them and they're not making eye contact. And as we all know, and I get it, you're in a hurry. So I tell nurses, I get it. You're over here. You're like, and what brought you in today? Do you feel safe at home? And they're not making the patient feel, so I say to them, stop, take a break, make eye contact. Ooh, now the patient's like, whoa, she's looking at me. She's going to ask me something serious. And that's when, you can say, I'm going to ask you some questions. And I know that you might not feel comfortable talking to me about it, but I just want to make sure that no one else is in the room when you ask those questions, right? So I talk to them about, because I'm like, you may be the only person that they are able to disclose this to. This is their one shot. And oftentimes patients, they'll say, there's so much research around this. They'll say, if I would have been asked more than one question, because maybe that first time you asked me, I still didn't feel comfortable, but then you ask it to me in a different way. Has anything ever happened to you or your children? Oh, okay, now you're talking about my kids. So yeah, maybe I am going to disclose something there. You see what I'm saying? Like asking more than one question, because just one question may not be it. If you ask a couple, by that third one, I might answer that then. And then if you investigate a little more, you might find out a little more. And what I tell the nurses is, I get it. Because once they disclose, a nurse feels like, oh, now it's my responsibility. What am I going to do? Right? And I tell them, that's why we're there. That's the whole reason we're there. Now you can say, we have a medical advocate that can come talk to you. If you don't want to talk to them now, I can give you their phone number. You can talk to them later. And guess what? Boom, you're done. See? So now it's no longer about, now this is on me. Now I've got to find out, I got to make sure she's safe. No. You're giving them the opportunity to talk to a professional, somebody who, this is what we do, right? And then, most of the time, they do want us to come to their bedside. We went through COVID, which was a whole other ordeal. And that's when we started doing virtual meets. And that kind of opened a door, because sometimes people don't feel comfortable with somebody coming to their bedside, or sometimes it's not safe in the moment because the person causing harm is constantly there. So that could be in a case where there's a baby in the NICU, right? And so she'll come to see the baby in the NICU, and so will the father or the person that causes harm. And so we have to get real creative, and we work real well with the healthcare professionals on, she's going to say she's going to go talk to a lactation specialist. She's going to say she's going to go talk to this other person. Get her alone, and then we can meet with her there, and we can talk to her, talk about, the main thing is safety planning. One, we do a lethality assessment, because we want to determine How safe is the situation? Are there guns at home? Has he, strangled or hit her in the head in the past? How often? How long has this been going on? Were you, pregnant during the time that this abuse was happening? There's all these different questions that we go through with the patient, or if she's discharged, the mom, after the fact, and then we'll determine how safe or unsafe she is. And from there, we talk about other resources. The key is to let her know she's not alone, because oftentimes survivors of domestic violence feel no one understands, no one's going to believe me, because especially if they've been with this person for many years. Probably at the beginning they were reaching out to their friends and family, they were asking for help, but as you previously stated, 7 times on average they go back. Well, many times friends would be like, I'm not going to do anything because you're just going to go back. So why am I going to get all invested, take your calls at 2 a.m, pick you up, get you to the hotel, do whatever? You're just going to go back. So they lose all of their support system. What ends up happening is exactly what the person that causes harm wants: isolation, for them to feel there's no one that's going to believe them. No one's going to help them. So that's the other main key for us, to let them know you're not alone. We're here. We believe you. And then, we go from there, but we want to make sure, it's completely patient driven. Whatever it is that they want to do, often the case that they're not ready to leave, and that's fine. So, but they do want to talk. They want to get this out. They want to have somebody they can vent to, talk to, feel like they're not alone. And so our medical advocates, once they're discharged from the hospital, what's good is that in the majority of our hospitals, we actually have an office on site. So they can say, oh, I'm just going to the hospital, I have a follow-up, or I have this, or I have that, or I'm taking the baby to the hospital for a follow-up. And then they can actually meet with their medical advocate in a private location within the hospital setting. In other instances, if they can't get to the hospital, because we do have some patients that are of older, and so they'll go to their senior homes. So we have a good relationship with some senior locations, and they'll go there and I'm going for my chair yoga. And they're really meeting with their medical advocate in a side, office. And again, because somebody who's been in a marriage for 50, 60 years, they're not ready to just up and leave, right? There's a lot of fear of financial insecurity. Where am I going to live? My children are turning their back on me. And some of the kids, which often is the case with a person that causes harm, they're not this bad person in public. Often the case is that everyone thinks they're amazing, and they do all these amazing things, and I've never seen them be aggressive and all this stuff. And so they have so many people bamboozled on who they really are, because when that door closes, that partner, the person that is the survivor, is the one that really sees what's going on and is experiencing this. And so it is definitely a very difficult situation to maneuver, but our medical advocates are so good at making sure that the patient or the survivor is getting their needs met, and that we're going at their pace. It is all patient driven. Whatever the key is, showing them their options, letting them know we're there, and then they drive where we go.
That is incredible. Are you guys going to expand out of Chicago?
Oh,
this
yes.
needs to be everywhere.
Oh, yes.
Right?
I'm so glad you said that, because we actually are. Miami. Yes, Miami. We've been, Rebecca and Latanya have been working on this for about 2 to 3 years at this point. They brought me in last year. I presented to the University of Miami Hospital. They were like, when can you start? And I remember sitting on the end, and I was like, as with all things, when you are a nonprofit, you have to raise enough money to be able to support the program, not just for this first year, but we have to think long term, because we're going to hire people on the spot there, right? And so we're getting closer to launch. We're getting very close. I know we're getting very close, having the MOU with the hospital, and then we'll start with the hiring, and that would be to have a medical advocate on site there in Miami to do the same things that we're doing here. And then as we continue to raise additional monies, we will be able to expand that program. It is an amazing program, and the impact is, I can't even express it. I mean, when you think about 80 to 83, and this is not just our numbers, this is kind of across the board, 80 to 83% of survivors of domestic violence indicate being hit in the head or strangled by their partner. 80 to 83. Okay. Why do I say hit in the head or strangled? Is because a person who has been strangled by their partner is 750% more likely to be murdered by that partner.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why that statistic is so important. And that's why it's so important to catch these things, because those questions often are not asked, right? If I'm a survivor and I go to the ED because maybe I got pushed down the stairs and, my arm, got broke. So survivors don't go to the ED just because they had a bad fight, maybe got slapped, hit in the head, even strangled. Oftentimes, if they get up and they're like, well, I'm fine. Yeah, I've got some bruising, maybe a little petechia around my eyes, but I'm okay. What they don't realize is they don't know what's going on internally. And when there's been a potential head trauma or brain injury potential, that person, it could become lethal for 2 weeks after. And in 50% of the cases where a person died as a result of a brain injury, strangulation, there was no signs. There were no signs. So what does that say? That says that, and another thing you got to take in consideration, again, usually survivors are not, like I said before, they're not going to go to the ED just because, they were strangled if they're okay now. They will go if their arm is broke or if they need stitches. And what happens, right? When you go to the ED, they're looking, what brings you in today? Well, I've got this broken arm. I fell down the stairs. They're not going to ask him, were you, did anything else occur? How did it, oh, well, actually I was strangled. Okay. That's not what's taking precedence, is this arm that was broke, right? Well, if we get involved, we're going to ask those questions. And if they say, oh, yes, I have been strangled, our next question is, has this happened before? And then once we determine that they screen positive for a potential head injury, then we go through a different screening process, because we want to be able to know how to best help them tell their healthcare providers so that they get the correct assessments, whether that's a CT scan, a CTA scan, an MRI, whatever it is, because we need to be able to see, right, what is there something going on internally besides this broken arm, right? And they're not even thinking about that, because what brought them in is the broken arm.
Right. Okay. So one thing that you said that kind of I wanted to address is brain injury or head injury. When people think of a head injury or brain injury, they're thinking their head is getting smashed into something or something is smashing into their head. But strangulation is included in that.
Yes. And I'm glad you said that, because oftentimes a myth is that a brain injury can't be caused by strangulation, right? Because it's here. People are like, oh, it's your neck. It's not your brain. But what's happening, if you think about it, when a person is being strangled, they're losing oxygen. Blood flow is no longer going. Well, if it's not going and oxygen is not getting to the brain, that's a potential brain injury. And then oftentimes another thing that a patient will say, well, yeah, I was choked, but I'm fine, right? And that's another misconception, right? You choke on food. That's an internal issue where you can't breathe, something's choking, it's internal. When somebody is strangling you, That is external. They are causing they are causing damage to this part of your neck, which you have blood going up and down, you have oxygen going up and down. There are blood vessels there. There are capillary. You've got all these things going on that people don't think about, right? And you could get a carotid artery. Like, there is just so many things that can occur when that strangulation is occurring. And people are like, well, really, I don't think anything happened. Or I passed out for just a short period of time. What we then do is we talk to them about there's studies on, depending on how long you were unconscious or you're being strangled for. So like the first 15 seconds is when like you potentially could go unconscious, you could seize, you could lose loss of bladder at about 15 seconds, loss of bowel movements at 30 seconds. So that's how, when we are talking to somebody and we're trying to help them, remember, because oftentimes I don't remember. I remember coming home, or I remember pulling in the driveway, and then I don't remember anything. I woke up on the floor, and it's like, okay, and I know it's personal, but we'll talk about, did you have a loss of bladder? Did you have a loss of bowel? Because that will determine how long you were being strangled for, right? Like how long that was occurring. Right. Seizing could, again, up to 1 minute. And then, after that, death can occur. So I tell people, when you're being strangled, it's either death or near miss. That's the reality. That is really the reality. It's death or a near miss. And so depending, going back to documenting, when we talk to people about this, because oftentimes they're like, oh, I don't want to get police involved. I don't want to get an order of protection. And we can say that's fine. But let's talk about this from a standpoint of, when the medical provider, when your doctor is asking you how long, let's talk about this so that you can have a better idea of how long this happened. We'll talk to them about, like, well, when you woke up, if you get home at 5, right? So let's assume that you were probably strangled somewhere between 5, and then when did you wake up? Well, I don't really remember. Oh, but my son got home and he gets off of work at 7. Okay, so somewhere between 5 and 7 is when it occurred, right? So now you have a time frame. Did you lose the bowels? Did you lose, control of your bladder? So those kinds of things. It's helping them try to remember, because there is nothing more a feeling of hopelessness than not knowing what happened to you during a period of time. That loss, it's a loss of control, right? And so you're helping them try to recollect, and then you're helping them with journaling. All right, we're going to write that we think it happened to 5 and 7. If this happened, then we know it probably happened for about 30 seconds. Right? Did you have petechia? If they're present with you, and they don't always have that, not everyone. And you have to also remember that not everyone's skin color is the same. You're not going to see the same things. Bruising looks different on people. And sometimes there's no, signs whatsoever. Physical. Now, maybe there are other signs. Are you having trouble sleeping? Oh my gosh, yeah. Ever since it happened, I'm like, I feel dysregulated. Like I'm up all night, or I don't feel myself. Like there's just something that's not right. Or maybe I normally don't get this frustrated or agitated. I'm losing my temper all the time. This is so dysregulating, and I don't know what's happening. You start talking to them. When do you notice these symptoms happening? Well, it happens when I'm around loud noises, or it happens when I'm in a room with very bright lights. So all of these things are symptoms that are triggering the survivor, and they're they're being re-triggered. And so it's helping them learn to cope, because the reality is, we're not doctors. We can only help with the symptoms to a certain extent, right? There really is no way of once those, arteries are dissected, they're gone. Like, and so to get them to and if you've been a survivor who's been strangled multiple times for years and years, it's a lot different. If you think about a football player, the average time that they're going to be, with head impacts, I mean, it's 3-4 years, right? And we see what happens when they go longer than that. Well, imagine a survivor who's been in this relationship for years and years and never got help, never, just felt like, I don't know what's wrong with me. My cognitively, I mean, I'm intelligent. You have people that are like, I've got a degree. I'm a smart person. I cannot think. My memory is gone. These are all symptoms, right? That they're not recognizing one for the other. They're not associating the two. There is such a correlation, but they don't know that.
So are you also teaching? I know like the medical staff is going to do their questionnaire, and if they answer positive to certain things, they're going to call you guys in. But if somebody is there and they've determined that there is a possible strangulation, are they educated to look beyond the external symptoms of bruising or the petechiae, or is that something that you guys will get?
We advocate on behalf of our client, our patients. Like, once we've determined, we help them advocate for themselves, and we advocate as well. So, and you run into issues, right? Because let me think of it. Okay. So if a person is, let's hypothetically say, in the behavioral unit, okay? So it's not a physical thing, right? They're in there because of cognitive issues and right? So the advocate may advocate, hey, I think we need to look deeper and maybe do a CTA scan, see where these, what do you call it, dissected arteries possibly could be. Let's see, like the doctors are going to figure it out. We're not, but at least look there. Well, that psychiatrist who is the prescribing doctor is like, I really can't order that. You know what I mean? So we would advocate and say, this is why we think this is happening. Right. And most of the time we can get through, especially if it's in the medical side of the hospital. Behavioral health, it's a little more difficult because, again, they're looking at other things, right? But if we explain to them that obviously when there is damage to the different parts of the brain, and depending, it could be they were strangled and banged up against the wall. So now it's the back of the head. And so other things could be happening. They're cognitively, they're not, it's emotional and it's physical. So there's all these things going on. And that's what we will then help the patient and help them advocate for those things. And we'll advocate for them as well, because we're part of the, we're in the hospital. We have good relationships with the social workers and the nurses. They call on us for a reason, because they know we're going to be able to work with this patient, and we want to get them from A to B. We want to get them from there to a safe house, if that's the case, or to another place, whichever they deem safe for them, because we understand it's a continuum of care. It's not just, you're a patient, let's do some safety planning, good luck. No, this is going to take time. This is going to take a lot of time, because depending on how severe the potential head injury is, that's how much of support they're going to need. And so it's so important that the medical advocate works with them, journaling, because one of the main things that we see is memory issues. And so what's unfortunate for people with a potential head injury is, because they have these memory losses and because they're cognitive issues, they miss appointments, they seem disengaged, they lose opportunities that they'll make an appointment, but then they'll forget they had the appointment, or they won't remember. And so one of the things that we've done, even for our own safe house staff, is we talk to them about compassion before critique. We talk to them about, this person is going to need a little more support. So when you meet with them weekly, it's going to take sending them an email after you met with them. Here's all the things we talked about today, right? And these are the things that you're going to do this week. And then here's some stuff I'm going to work on. And we're going to make sure that we both will touch base, in the middle of the week. And I'm going to remind you that we're going to see each other again Tuesday at 10. And so they have a record of it, and then giving them that reminder, helping them. Like many people have these smartphones where you can set alarms for things that so you don't forget. Oh yeah, 10 o'clock, because people be like, oh my gosh, staff will be like, she forgot to go pick up her kids. Do you really think that was really what you wanted to do? Right? Like helping them with, okay, I'm going to set my alarm at 3:15. So I remember I've got to run out. I'm going to go pick up the kids, right? Giving them sunglasses. So we have like these little head injury kind of kits. And so if somebody discloses in one of our safe house or housing program, they will get this kit to give to that client. And it has like little hydration packets for water. It has a little pair of glasses, noise canceling earphones, because that's another thing that could be re-triggering is loud noises, and a journal. And then, we talk to them about the importance of keeping a journal, talking about, remembering that's how you can keep a thing, having a calendar, because even though you make an appointment, maybe even on your phone, but some people having that hard copy and being able to open it up and look at it, or that fact of actually writing it out. Those are all things that we work with them on coping, breathing, grounding techniques, anything that will help the person get back to regulated once again, and one of the main things I tell advocates and counselors, like or anybody who's working with a survivor of a head injury, be patient. And if the person is triggered, you'll know, and don't continue the interview or the discussion or the meeting, because they are not in a place any longer that is going to be beneficial to them or you. You're not going to get anything done because they're so dysregulated. So it's a lot of that kind of work that we're doing right now within the hospital and outside of the hospital.
That's a lot. So I was looking at my notes here, and when we spoke last time, I wrote down, and correct me if I didn't write this down correctly,
Okay.
but I wrote the highest rate of traumatic brain injury is due to domestic violence or intimate partner violence.
That is 100% correct. It is a misconception that it is military or it is the sports, because who else do you always hear, right? You hear about it in the military, all the PTSD, and you hear about it in our sports, right? And if you think about, I love telling this, if you are watching a football game or even a baseball game, because those pitches come at 90, 100 miles an hour, somebody gets hit in the head, whatever, boom, the game stops. You've got medical personnel coming out to the field, they're checking, they're getting immediate medical, and they're rushed off the field, right? And they are not allowed back in the game until they're cleared. Now, think about a survivor of intimate partner violence or of DV. There's no person sweeping into that house going, whoop, that's it. She's no longer going to be able to go to work, take care of kids, or do anything until she is fully cleared, right? Survivors of domestic violence do not get the medical attention, as quickly or as often. So most of the time, by the time we've gotten to them, this has happened more than once, and oftentimes for years. And so they've not gotten the medical assistance that they've needed. They haven't associated one with the other, right? They're just thinking, I'm stressed. And this is a common issue with counselors and medical providers, is because they think it is related to the domestic violence that they've been over years and years and years. They're just depressed because of the domestic violence, or they're anxious because of the domestic violence, or they're paranoid or PTSD or all this. They're not thinking that there could potentially be, the issue is because of a head injury. They're not They don't know that, right? And so, and most of the research that is done, even as of today, is for the military and for sports because there's money there. Who wants to study, intimate partner violence survivors, right? And then add on, because domestic violence occurs in the unhoused population as well, right? And that definitely is another very much at risk population that is not researched. And so you cannot apply the research that's been done on how to have a healthy male, young male, be treated for a head injury versus a woman that has endured head injuries and strangulations multiple times. It's not going to be the same because she has other strenuating circumstances as well. She still has to suit up and show up for those kids. She still has to go to work. She is not getting the medical attention that this military person or this sports person is getting. So the research is based over here. It's not over here. It's not. That's why it's a very understudied, and it so needs the attention that the medical or that the military and the sports are getting. But it's not. It doesn't.
And for those who minimize the head injury, and I'm including victims, you mentioned how a lot of victims won't seek medical attention if they've been strangled. Hey, that's me. And, I'm a medical professional, so I know better. But I did not. If I were bleeding, I would have, probably.
Yeah.
But I did not. But just for those who minimize the effects, and you've listed a number of effects of brain injury, those are not reversible. So every time it's happening, you're stacking on and you don't get that back.
No, you don't. And that's why for us, we work with how can we help them cope with, right? What are some techniques that we can help them so that they can continue to live, and thrive as best they can within, with everything that's going on, right? But it's like I said, it's compassion before critique, and it's hard, right? Because you think of a survivor that is like losing, she's irate and she's angry and she's blaming you for everything, and you're like, you don't know what's going on. She's not able to regulate. So instead of, saying, that's it, you're no longer in our program. No, let's get her the help and let's figure out, when is she being triggered? What is the trigger? There's, because another thing you think about, if somebody comes into a safe house, I mean, they're with 45 other people. It's not a quiet place. Right.
Right.
And it's full of kids running everywhere. And so if somebody is triggered by that, we need to work on that, right? If you're meeting with somebody that is triggered by the lights, dim the lights, right? Maybe putting them in a room that's not so close to the kitchen or the living room where there's all this noise going on. It's really thinking about and putting that survivor first. But you wouldn't know any of these things if you didn't do the assessment, if you didn't find out that she had been strangled multiple times or had been hit in the head multiple times for years and years and never associated the two, right? And never got medical attention for it either. So yeah, it's definitely understudied. And our goal is that we want studies to continue and to not just on survivors of DV, but also survivors that compounded with strangulation, head injuries. And then I haven't even talked about the LGBTQ and transgendered community, right? Like those communities, even less studied, right? Like, so there's just so much, but yeah, those are definitely big areas that we are focusing on right now. And we've been very fortunate that the pilot program that we once started 2 years ago through an amazing grant through the Michael Reese Foundation started all of this. And we were able to start the pilot toolkit program. So, brain injury. And from that came the development of the TBI toolkit, which is going to launch this fall. And what that is going to do is it is a program, it's a toolkit that we have developed. So if you're a intimate partner violence agency looking to start a hospital program with the focus on brain injury or head injury, this is going to be your toolkit. Everything from how to start in a hospital, developing those relationships, and moving forward, like how do you start that, having the advocate, when do you have a counselor or a child counselor, who are the key people that you want to bring to the table. Because the other thing that we do within our partner hospitals is we have a task force. And so it's not just a social worker or a nurse. No, we need people from all parts of that hospital to have the buy-in, right? Because we need them to understand that this is affecting all aspects. If you want to stop recidivism in your hospital, you don't want them to keep coming to your hospital, right? Then we need the buy-in from everyone. We need everyone, because often we would, we do what we call rounding. So we'll walk around to the different departments. Hi, I'm April. I'm with the Wings program. Let me leave you my cards. We'll do bedside. We talk a little bit about everything. And of course, we'll bring bagels because nurses need food. They don't get food.
That's right.
So we've got to bring them some food. They're always on the run.
Fuel them.
Yeah, you got to fuel them. And plus they'll remember, who's that girl that brought those bagels? And so, those are the things we're doing so that they remember us, right? They remember that we're there to help them. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing.
I love that. So I thought of a couple of questions.
Sure.
Actually, one I wonder how many of those medical staff, those medical personnel that you have come in promoting Wings have looked in at their own relationships. I bet there are quite a few that have learned about themselves and what's happening as they're learning about what you guys are doing.
I'm glad you said that, because we actually, as everyone within our partner agencies know, we are not just there for their patients, we're there for their staff. And we have received referrals from our hospitals. And and usually what we try to do is have them go to a different one of our partner hospitals, because, people talk. And so we don't want them going in and seeing, or we can meet with them virtually. But yes, we do get, in fact, it's another thing, because I also go into like local colleges, nursing schools, and talk about what we do, right? And then after, inevitably, there's always one student that'll come up to me and say, I really need to talk to somebody, right? And so it really moves me, because I'm like, and you're coming into this profession, this is great that you're going to address this before you're there, right? Because somebody who's going or is in those kinds of relationships or those situations are going to have a hard time when they are working with somebody in front of them that is experiencing domestic violence. So, often that does happen. It does. We get internal referrals.
And that's the importance of speaking out about this, because you never know who's going to hear it. Right. It just takes one time for the right person to hear it. Yes. And actually, so that sort of leads into one of my questions, is back to triggers. You were talking about sound and light being potential triggers. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that when the abuse was happening, that it was happening in a loud environment or a really bright environment. So it's not even something that a victim could potentially anticipate being a trigger.
No, it's due to the damage to the lobes, different lobes in the brain, right? When I do my PowerPoint presentation, I have a picture of the brain, and I'll say, in this lobe's the sight and hearing, and this part controls your sleep patterns, cognitive, whatever. And so depending on what part of the brain has been damaged or potentially damaged, that's why they're having these issues. It has nothing to do with they poked their eye or they did what. No. The brain control. I mean, people don't think about it. Your brain is such an important part of your body, and it's why it's protected by a skull, and so when there is a potential brain injury, even if it was a slight, minor to moderate, whatever, that causes them to have these side effects, these symptoms, and they don't associate it. They don't know, like, why am I constantly getting headaches? Why can I not sleep? Like I cannot, or I'm getting so emotional all the time and I don't understand it. Those are all symptoms of some sort of, potential brain injury. But again, they won't know unless they are diagnosed by a medical professional and done through, different scans that they could have done. But also, it's not just different scans, because the reality is you may not see it, right? Like even a CT scan, unless it just occurred, you're not going to see like a brain bleed or something like that. A CTA, yeah, you could probably see some of the dissected arteries. MRI, you might see some stuff, but I'm in the research that I've done, from what I have heard, if you lost consciousness, saw stars, have any moment of, I don't remember, there's a potential for a brain injury there. There is, right? Something has happened for that to occur. And that is the part that people don't understand, is that just because you may have only lost consciousness for 10 seconds. Oh, I didn't, lose my bladder or bowel movements or anything. I must have just, but yeah, I do have markings, and I do remember, my eyesight going black a little bit, but I'm fine. I'm fine. Look at me. I'm fine. 2 weeks after that, you potentially it could still be a lethal case, right? Like, because you don't know what's happened inside your brain. You don't know if there's anything that is, if, there's the lack of oxygen, if there's like any kind of issues with the air in the blood. We don't know, right? And I'm not a doctor. That's why I always say, please have a medical professional. And I tell them, let's talk let them know all the things, talk to them about, it's not just this incident that occurred, right? This has been going on. And so then the medical professional will be able to know, oh, this could be something a little more serious, right? This could be something a little more serious. We need to really investigate this.
So, I mean, you've talked about all these reasons why this is such a significant thing to pay attention to. And you already mentioned the statistic of increased lethality of 750% by someone who's been strangled by their partner. And you also mentioned the lethality risk assessment. And I can't remember if it was you that told me or if it was someone else, but that there's a bill on the floor that Illinois, was it you? Okay.
Yes, HB 4668. So right. Here's the thing. When there's a domestic violence call, right? Like I'm sure you've always heard that, officers will say, oh, that's the most dangerous call is going on a domestic, right? And they're right? It is dangerous. But add to that if the person is a strangler. If they are a person that strangles, it's increased exponentially. Now, let's talk about when there's a domestic, they go out. Sometimes they don't do lethality assessments. Sometimes they're going to give information on a domestic violence agency. Sometimes they're going to tell the person that causes harm to just go for a walk and cool off. Sometimes they're going to tell the person that is the survivor, is there somewhere else you can go that you'll feel safe? And they're not doing the assessment. So they don't really know how lethal this situation is. There is a bill on the floor, and I believe it passed last week, 2 weeks ago. I think it passed 2 weeks ago. So it won't go into effect though until 2028. And so now what they're working on is what is going to be in this lethality assessment that all police officers in the state of Illinois are going to have to do. They're going to have to ask these questions. So if they go on a domestic, they're going to have to ask those questions. Are there guns in the home? Does he have a FOID card? Have you been strangled? how often has this happened? I don't, it could be a vast array. Usually there's actually, most lethality have like, I want to say 15 to 20 questions. And those questions will be asked. And depending on the lethality assessment, they then will be referred, right? And so that's so key. It is so key. And there's several states within our country that already have passed this. That's why I was so excited to hear that it finally did pass. And they're actually bringing in, I believe, domestic violence agencies to help and assist and be a part of the development of the lethality assessment, what it should look like, right? And I know that for an officer, it's just one more thing that they have to do. But if they think about it, if they do this lethality assessment and they refer the person to get the assistance that they really need, I I am a true believer that that is going to impact the amount of survivors that actually get help and that actually escape, right? So yeah, I'm very excited about that.
Well, and I agree with you. You also mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, is how when the nurses or whatever medical staff are questioning people, they may be the only person that they say something to. And
Yeah,
it's the same situation for these police officers who are going out to these calls. They may be the very first person that this victim is telling what happened, and their reaction is going to set the precedence of what that victim does going forward. Are they going to tell anyone anymore?
right,
Are they going to be believed?
right.
And yes, it may be more paperwork for a police officer to go through this questionnaire, but I mean, think of all the paperwork that they could be saving themselves for down the line when they actually have to investigate a homicide because they didn't follow
Exactly,
up on this.
exactly,
And
exactly.
And another statistic that I heard, sorry, I'm getting very excited here, is that police officers who are killed in the line of duty, 80% of those, I believe, are from someone who had previously strangled their partner.
That's
So,
100%. That is very, very true. I mean, that's why we say, yeah, domestics are dangerous, but 80% of them are people that strangled. I mean, the Pulse nightclub, the guy that shot all those people at the Pulse nightclub, he was a strangler.
yeah.
The Petito case, Gabby Petito, another one. He
Hmm.
was a serial strangler.
Yes.
And yeah, so there's just so many. Mass shooting situations in those cases, I can't remember the statistic, but the majority of them were stranglers.
Right.
It's the ultimate form of control. I can take your life, right? It's that God complex. Because remember what I said, it's death and near misses, and sometimes and another area that I definitely think is important, and I really think that we need to address this with even the younger generation is because there's that sexual strangulation. There's a lot of they're doing a lot of research on that right now because people are like, oh, they get you to the point where you're about to pass out, and they think that that's okay. They're damaging their brain, and so and the younger generation may not know this, right? Because they're not privy to what is actually happening to their brain. And so
Right.
yeah, there's just so many ways that this needs to continue to be studied and researched. And
Yes, I agree. And I think back to the younger generation that is doing that sexual strangulation or whatever.
mhm,
There's a term for it. It might be that. I can't remember exactly what they call it. But I'm curious that of how much of that is actual consensual. And I know that a lot of people are saying it is consensual, but if you are being coerced into saying yes, then that's actually not consensual.
exactly, exactly,
And
100%.
yes. And then I know I bring Gabby up all the time, and God bless her. But if there was a lethality assessment that would have been done on that, I mean, not
Yes,
even a lethality assessment, I think just a little tiny bit more education in that time when they pulled them over. there could have been a completely different outcome. But for sure, a lethality assessment would have addressed all of the concerns. They would have been able to recognize something. It wouldn't have been, Gabby, go take a shower
Exactly.
somewhere. I
Right.
mean, my God.
Well, I mean, if you remember back to it, she was crying, and the officer's saying, he said I think you slapped him or you whatever. So instead of arresting you, we're just going to put him up in a hotel, and you're just going to take the truck or whatever. And she's crying hysterically, and if you were looking at it and didn't know, right? People might be like, oh, she's crying because she feels guilty. No, she can't regulate her emotions. And if you think about it, she's been strangled so many times that this is just, yeah, it's so sad. If they really had if they would have asked her more questions, if there would have been a female on site, I personally think if there would have been a female on site that could have, gotten her to a regulated state. Like, there's a person's crying. There's something wrong there. There's something
Mm-hmm.
wrong. He's cool and collected over there, right?
Making jokes.
Making jokes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets put up in a hotel. Yeah, no.
Especially when the initial call was because of him doing something to her.
Right. And how did they not know that?
Right.
It's the whole thing. Yeah.
So I had another question, and I think that's my last
Okay.
official question. But when you said that you were expanding to Miami, that actually made me think of human trafficking. And a lot of the same things that happen to domestic violence victims also happen to trafficking victims. And I'll admit that when you said Miami, I went to the stereotypical version of trafficking, as in this is somebody gets kidnapped and they're quick shipped out. And Miami is a perfect hub for trafficking, of international trafficking. But trafficking does exist within domestic relationships, and it does exist within suburbs and cities and your neighborhood that you're living in. So realizing that stereotype is not necessarily accurate, but your questionnaire, I feel, would also address trafficking victims. Do you guys get trafficking victims as well, or do you
So,
have?
yeah. Oh, yeah. We
Okay.
definitely have in the past. There are specific agencies that assist them specifically. But we have had a few, because there is that fine line, right? There's that very fine line, because there's times that they're being trafficked, but they have children with this person. Because initially, it's oftentimes they're being brought in by, like, oh, he's my boyfriend, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to move you over here, and we'll have kids and you won't have to work. And then once you're there, you've been cut off from everybody. And if you're from a different country, they'll take your passport. If you have children, they'll threaten to say, well, I'll call, immigration on you. They'll deport you. And guess what? I'm keeping the child. Well, what mother wants to do that? So, there's a lot of, intricacies with that. We don't get it as much, but yes, there is that overlapping. And also within the hospitals, when we do these task force, it's a combination of sexual assault, human trafficking, and DV, because there's a lot of overlap. There is, right? Just because I don't know how many times I've had discussions and talks with clients over the years where, different cultures believe that if I'm married to you, well, my body belongs to you. And so they feel like, well, I had to have sex, or I was raped, but it wasn't really rape because I'm his wife. And he said that if this is what I have to do. And so it's a lot of education also for our clients.
Yeah. And actually, I don't even know if marital rape is illegal in all of our states. It might, I
Oh
think there's a
gosh,
few
I hope it is, but
loopholes.
you're
I
right.
feel like
I
there are
don't
a
even
few
know.
loopholes in some. Okay. Do you think we covered everything you wanted to touch on?
I think so.
Okay. So if people wanted to learn more about
Yes.
Wings or anything about you or whatever, how do you have any links or social media that you want to share with everybody?
So if you go on our wings program.com website and then click on, I think it's how we help, there's a little tab that says traumatic brain injury, I believe. So if you are a person that potentially thinks you could have a head injury, there's kind of a little questionnaire in there. You can go in there, you can take the questionnaire. It talks about different symptoms, or maybe you have a friend or a relative that you would love to talk to them about this. Go on our website, go on there, talk to them about it. There's a little tab where you can ask for additional help, and then somebody will reach back out to you. If you want to reach out to me personally, feel free. I definitely love talking about this. If you have a program or a group that you think could benefit from knowing a little more about this, and I believe I gave my email address, but I can give it as aprilf@wingsprogram.com.
Perfect. Okay. And then in closing, do you have any words of wisdom or advice that you want to specifically leave with listeners?
You're not alone. We are here. Wings is here. And please know that we believe you. That is key. We believe you.
Yeah. Those are important words. Well, thank you, April. Actually, also thank you, Anthony Pasquini, because he's the one who introduced us. And
yes.
If anyone is still listening, Anthony did an episode, I believe it was back in January, where he did speak a little bit about wings. And he spoke mostly about men speaking out about domestic violence. So
which is so important. Yes.
Very important. And he did a fabulous job. So if you haven't listened to that, I believe it's a January 2026 episode that he was on. So thank you, Anthony, again. And April, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All of your work you've been doing with Wings. This is absolutely incredible. I'm in awe. I hope you guys take off and become an international sensation because this is so needed.
Thank you. Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you again, April, for joining me today. And thank you, Warriors, for listening. You can find the links April was referring to, as well as her 1 in 3 profile in the show notes. I will be back next week with another episode for you. Until then, stay strong. And wherever you are in your journey, always remember, you are not alone.
Find more information, register as a guest, or leave a review by going to the website 1in3podcast.com. That's the number 1, IN, the number 3, podcast.com. Follow 1 in 3 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1in3podcast. To help me out, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 1 in 3 is a .5 Pinoy production. Music written and performed by Tim Crow.